Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Championship week of the college football season is in the books. The first college football playoff is set up, and here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover all things the NFL draft, the Devy Slant Report with the transfer portal really kicking in the high gear. And we look at the Sunday aspect of it also in terms of the NFL Rookie Report and our Fantasy Dynasty Report. As always, so much to kind of break down and talk about from this past week of the college football season. So let's get right into it with the NFL Draft Report for this week. Championship week we just witnessed. Let's start at the quarterback position where we kind of always, I think the biggest storyline coming out of this week was Drew Allar's performance for Penn State. Listen, this has been a polarizing prospect pretty much his entire time in college. We know he was a big-time recruit. He's got traits. He's got tools. We saw a very inconsistent player in the past. This past year, we've seen more consistency from his game. And this week, 20 of 39, 226 yards and 3 touchdowns. We know it's been a roller coaster ride for so many of the quarterback prospects that are draft eligible in the 2025 class. We know Shadu Sanders and Cam Ward sit atop the quarterback rankings. I don't think that's going to change. I think they're probably at this point locks to be top 5 picks. But I do think that QB3 spot is wide open, right? At once upon a time, it was Jalen Milroe. That once upon a time, it was Quinn Ewers. Then it pivoted back to maybe Jalen Milroe. When the year started, obviously Carson Beck was in that mix. But now I think there's a real possibility that if Drew Allar comes out, his traits and his physical capabilities could push him into round 1, could make a team look at him if they're desperate enough and say, we believe that we can continue to refine him because he does have good athleticism. He can do things with his legs. He has an arm that can push the ball vertically down the field and into tight windows. He fits the prototype. Is there still decision-making, consistency questions? For sure. We've seen some of that cleaned up this year, and the hope of any NFL team would be that he continues to refine that aspect of his game. So if a team can't get Shadu Sanders, if a team can't get Cam Ward, do they look at a guy like Drew Allar somewhere in round 1, maybe a trade up, maybe a trade back, maybe a top of the second round? But I do think if he declares now, he's right there in the mix, most likely as the most likely quarterback for in this class. I still am fascinated with Jalen Milroe because of the raw traits, but I understand the home stretch of this season, he really struggled. I think it's best for him probably to go back to school. So I do think the door is now open for Drew Allar to make some, improvement in his draft stock for maybe a day 2 guy to maybe in the round 1 mix if he comes out and declares, and we'll see how the rest of this, the college football playoff plays itself out. Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, 2 other guys we've talked about a lot this year. Carson Beck leaves that game injured, unknown in terms of if we will see him again, when we might see him again. And then the question still becomes is where's his draft stock? I still think it's very much somewhere now in the day 2 range. We'll see if anything can change that. He was going to get an opportunity here with Georgia in the playoff. Now, uncertainty surrounding him due to the injury. Quinn Ewers, 27 of 46 this past week, 358 yards and 1 touchdown. Listen, I don't know what to say about Quinn Ewers. Like, he's a guy that it's a tough spot to be in because he was such a big-time recruit. We kept waiting to see signs, and we thought we finally were seeing it in the beginning of this college football season. And then the injury struck. Arch Manning came in. He got his job back, but you almost wonder if Texas just kind of went back to him because maybe they promised him, not when he didn't transfer, when Arch, chose there, that they were going to give him the job, and only injury would take that away. And they didn't want to go back on their word, and that's why Quinn Ewers continues to start for them. But you're not talking about him anymore as a round 1 caliber prospect. You're talking about him as maybe a day 2 type guy. He just hasn't put it together, and there's good physical traits, but there's nothing about him. Like, at least when you look at a guy like Drew Allar, he's got the running capability, he's got the size, the athleticism, he's got a better arm than Quinn Ewers. There's just aspects of Quinn Ewers' game that you wanted to see come together from the quarterbacking thing, and then his physical traits aren't on the level of a Jalen Milroe or a Drew Lar, and that makes it really difficult evaluation in terms of how high might an NFL team look at him. Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, Clemson with the big win this past weekend over SMU. He goes for 262 yards and 4 touchdowns. Another guy, former big-time recruit. He's kind of came into his own a little bit this year. I think we've seen the best of him this year. It'd be interesting to kind of see how Clemson performs in the playoff game. Can they pull off another upset? Can he continue to ride that momentum to a higher draftable prospect? I think he's more of a day 3 guy, but we'll see, if something can change that narrative. And then Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon. Dane Brugler was talking about him this past week as well. Another really polarizing prospect. Listen, he doesn't have the physical traits. He doesn't, he's not going to check off boxes in terms of size, frame, arm talent, push the ball vertically down the field, but the mental processing, the accuracy, the ball placement, the touch, the anticipatory throws, he is very fundamentally sound in those aspects. So it's going to be interesting to see if, once upon a time, I thought he might have been like a round 6, round 7 guy. We saw not that long ago that there was that shift to kind of maybe say, okay, we'll take a chance at a guy who, even if his ceiling is backup quarterback, we'll take late round 3 or somewhere in round 4, especially with the cost of what backup quarterbacks are. Then you throw into the mix a guy like, Brock Purdy. And I know they're very, very rare, extreme outliers. I always say, if you want your quarterback, go get it in round 1, because I think the odds of finding it anywhere else are very, very low. But a team's going to there might be some teams that look at a guy like Brock Purdy and say, why not take a shot on Dylan Gabriel in round 4? And maybe he becomes our Brock Purdy, a guy who doesn't have these top-end physical traits, but the other aspects of quarterbacking are really strong, that he can run our system, he can run our scheme, he could be a really important backup quarterback, and if the situation arises, maybe develop into a starting quarterback. So I do think that's a guy that, while I maybe question those physical traits so much to the point where I thought he was maybe a borderline draftable prospect, I think how he's performed this year, I think he's now probably put himself in the mix as potentially an early day 3 prospect. Maybe he's even as high as round 4 based on what we've seen. And listen, the odds are Oregon, might win the national title. We're going to get to see him in some more big spots as well. If we take this to the running back position this past weekend, Ashton Jeanty continued to do what he does, 209 yards and a touchdown. Again, the question will be with Jeanty, just how high is too high? Does he push his way into top 10? Is it top 15? Does he fall into the 20s? I think he's too talented, too skilled. And with what we've seen in the NFL this year, the impact of Saquon Barkley behind that offensive line and that system for Philadelphia, what we've seen from Derrick Henry in Baltimore, what we've seen in teams being willing to pay for David Montgomery and James Conner, who have a lot of wear and tear and in their late 20s, but to keep them on their teams. We're seeing a little bit of a shift in the value of running back, I think, in terms of teams realizing they're not as replaceable. Not saying you can't replace them. You can't find good running backs anywhere in the draft, because you can. But I do think Jeanty's too talented of a prospect to not go top 15. So I'm setting the over-under at like 15 right in the middle. I would take the under right now. I think some team falls in love with him. Maybe it's a small trade up. Maybe it's a team that we're not thinking. Might not be the best situation if they're a non-playoff team, but maybe it's a spot where they say we add him, maybe he could be that hump that gets us into the playoff contention as that unique weapon. And we haven't even seen his really good receiving prowess. This year, he's just been so dominant in terms of the running game that we haven't even seen his full arsenal of what he's capable of doing. Trevor Etienne, once Carson Beck went down, they really relied on Etienne for Georgia. 94 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, another prospect in this really deep class, penciled in somewhere, I think, for day 3. Talented prospect. Good size, good frame. I like the play strength. He's got some athleticism and speed to his game. A lot to like about Etienne there somewhere on day 3. Obviously, one of the big stories of the week, Cam Skidabo out of Arizona State, 5'11", 215. This year, he's almost got 1,600 yards and 19 touchdowns rushing, 506 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns on 37 receptions. Fantastic senior year there for him. It'd be interesting to kind of see. He was not a guy on most people's radars before the season started. He was not a guy that people were talking about early in the college football season, September, October, as a guy that could be in the mix to be a top 10, running back in this class. We saw guys like Woody Marks rise. We saw guys like, obviously, Caleb Johnson rise really high. But a guy like Skidabo, we'll see if he can be a guy that, puts himself in the mix there. How does the pre-draft process go for him? How do his testing numbers look? Can he be a guy that, with this top tier production this year, can he be a guy that pushes his way potentially into that round 4, round 5 mix? I think it's going to be fun to kind of watch that over the coming months. The Penn State duo, we've talked a lot about them this year. Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton. I'm more in favor of Singleton. I think the athleticism and big playability, but this past week in that championship game, both of them really performed well. Katron Allen, 124 yards and a touchdown. I think he's more of like a round 4 to round 6 type running back prospect. And then Nicholas Singleton, 105 yards and a touchdown. I think he's ticketed for day 2, but it's a deep class. Maybe he falls to round 4, but I think his talent warrants like a round 3 evaluation based on his big playability, very high pedigree in terms of when he got at Penn State. Overall athleticism, speed, burst, acceleration, I think puts him in that round 3 mix. Another running back, again, in this stacked class, Jordan James out of Oregon, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's put together a really strong year. Another guy going to be somewhere in that round 4, round 5 mix. As I've been saying, this is as deep a running back class. I do think Ashton Genty has separated himself. The clear guy is going to be in round 1. I think the other guys, it's going to be really tricky for teams. How high does guys like Amario Hampton go? Ollie Gordon go? Because it's such a strong running back class. Your teams say, you know what, we're going to wait. We're going to wait. And instead of taking somebody like Marion Hampton or Ollie Gordon in round 2 or 3, we're going to get somebody in round 4 or 5 that's not all that different in terms of a prospect than a guy like Hampton or Gordon. I like Hampton. He's my number 2 running back in the class. But if you're telling me Singleton's going to fall to the 4th round and I can get Singleton in the 4th round, or, Ollie Gordon's going to fall, it's going to be a tricky spot. I think everyone's coming away with a running back pretty much. He's going to be like 12 to 15 teams that I think take a running back that they're really high on in this draft class, because that's how deep of a running back class it is, with guys who are going to go round 4, round 5, who we're going to see more guys perform like Bucky Irvin's done for the Bucs this year, like Tyrone Tracy's done for the Giants this year. There's going to be guys all over the day 3 mix that, if they get the opportunity, are going to be really good performers at the next level. Really deep running back class. Excited to kind of see how it starts to shake out in the pre-draft process in terms of pecking order, who we're hearing is top 10, top 5, top 15 in terms of the running back room, who's day 2, day 3 draft capital. Does anyone have a shot to sneak in the back end of round 1 besides obviously Genty somewhere in the middle of round 1, I would guess? It'll be fun to kind of, look at this running back landscape and kind of, peg it from there. Wide receivers, Jaden Higgins for Iowa State this week, 7 catches, 115 yards. Tej Johnson continues to do his thing. There's going to be a lot of comps, I think, for Tej Johnson to a guy like Tank Dell, just the size and the frame. 11 catches, 181 yards, and a touchdown. I think Tank Dell was able to play more outside in college, which gives him a little bit of a leg up in terms of a draft evaluation. But someone's going to look at Tej Johnson and just see this explosive playmaker. And even if they think he's slot only, I think he's going to go somewhere late round 2, early round 3, because teams are looking for explosiveness. Teams are looking for playmakers. Tej Johnson brings that in spades to any team that he would get drafted by in the NFL. Tyler Warren, at this point, I think I'd almost be stunned if he's not tight end 1. 7 catches, 84 yards for the number 1 tight end in the class this year. Obviously, Colston Loveland, not that far behind him, but it's also going to be, I think, Warren, when he tests at the combine, the adjusted athleticism scores on top of his blocking prowess. He cleaned up a lot of the drop issues that he had last year. Warren's going to, I think, pencil himself in top 20, top 25, and I don't think Loveland will be that far behind him. Some other news over the last, week or so, we had some official declarations from some of the top draft-eligible underclassmen prospects from the country. I mentioned them before, but Ollie Gordon and Caleb Johnson both declared. I think you're going to find Caleb Johnson in most people's top 3 or top 5 running backs. I think Ollie Gordon somewhere in that mix too, maybe falls a little bit, but I think both of them, you're going to see both of them in a lot of people's top 5 running backs. I think the question becomes, are they round 2? Are they later on day 2, somewhere maybe in round 3? Do any of these guys potentially fall to early round 4 because of the depth of the class? But I think both of these guys, I would put them in right now as day 2 guys. Maybe one sneaks into round 2, the other one maybe round 3, but both of these guys, high-end caliber running back prospects in this loaded running back group. At the wide receiver position, we had 3 major names declare. Travis Hunter officially, I think he's going to be in the mix to be the first pick overall. If it's a team like the Jaguars, I think it's almost locked in stone that Hunter's going to be the guy. Obviously, the other teams, that the Raiders, the Giants, who are in the quarterback hunt, that's where it gets a little dicey. If the Raiders and the Giants have 1-2, does it go quarterback, and somehow Travis Hunter, who's probably the best prospect bar none in this draft class, does he fall potentially to 3rd overall pick? But he declares, obviously now the story will start to turn to, what does the NFL view him as? Wide receiver, corner. Is he going to dictate it? Is he going to try to play both? If so, how much? Is he going to be a full-time on one side and then like a part-time on the other? Is it going to be like 50-50 on each way? Is it possible he tries to play 100%, a full-time player on one, and then like a 50 to 75% on the other side? Something we've never seen before. That's where the narrative will start to turn here with Travis Hunter. But I don't think you're going to find many overall big boards take positional value out of the mix that don't have Travis Hunter as a number 1 overall player in this class. To me, the Heisman race is not even a conversation. As great of a statistical year as Ashton Jeanty had, Travis Hunter literally was a top 3 wide receiver and cornerback playing full-time this year. Top 3 overall wide receiver, top 3 overall cornerback. You could make the case maybe even 1-1 if we're not talking stats, but just importance and ability level, how much defenses had to pay attention to him on offense, what he was able to do in terms of shutting down, top receivers on the other teams. You can make the case top 3 or best overall at both positions this year. He should be the Heisman. And to me, it's not even really that close. Ashton Jeanty, amazing year. Clearly should be the runner-up, but I don't think it's that close with Hunter. 2 other wide receiver declarations. Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. This was a guy that I wasn't as high on before the season started, and then he just kind of kept winning me over. Now, I don't think he's a top 50 guy, but I do now think he's a day 2 guy. So he's not going to test out great, but this guy has really good body control, ball skills, the ability to contort his body, physicality and toughness with the play strength at the catch point. So I think Trey Harris is going to be a guy somewhere in that probably round 3 mix, maybe sneaks into round 2, that will look to be a compliment, probably like a number 2 receiver on the team. They want that physical, tough, possession wide receiver, but can get vertical and win with that physicality as well. I think that's Trey Harris's game. And then Luther Burden also, obviously, I think he's our wide receiver 2 in this class. Wide receiver 3 in this class after Travis Hunter and Tet McMillan. I'd be really surprised if Luther Burden is not a round 1 pick. I think he'll be somewhere in that like late teens to early to mid 20 range. Great after the catch, good route runner, but it's really the run after the catch ability, the offensive, versatility in terms of he can win inside, he can win outside, you can manufacture touches him, he can win in the route. He shows the ability to win at the catch point, even for a guy who doesn't have a lot of size. So Luther Burden, really strong prospect in his own right. Be interesting to kind of see if we get a 40 time from him. Is it at his pro day? Does he do work at the combine? Those are all factors that I'll be watching really closely. And then at the tight end position, Mason Taylor out of LSU. I think right now he's really locked in as tight end 3. I think we talked about Tyler Warren. We talked about Colston Loveland. I think Mason Taylor locked in tight end 3 in this class. I think he's probably in that late round 2 to round 3 mix. Would I be surprised late round 2? No, especially if the first 2 guys go in the top 35, top 40 picks. Somebody could look at Mason Taylor late in round 2 and pull the trigger. If not, I'd expect him to definitely come off the board in round 3. Versatile player, can play in line, can play detached, can attack the seam. A lot you can do with Mason Taylor if he's a part of your offense. Let's take this to the Devy Slant Report for this week. And really, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. We have time over the coming weeks to talk about, acceptances to the Shrine Bowl, to the Senior Bowl. Obviously, come January, the week of, we'll do full preview shows on those. But a lot of big names have entered the transfer portal. Some of them were draft eligible guys. Some of them were guys who were not draft eligible that we had been talking about in the Devy Slant Report during this year. Start at the quarterback position. Jackson Arnold is leaving Oklahoma. I mean, there was a period of time early in the year that we were talking about Jackson Arnold, and maybe we weren't putting him there with Arch and Nico and Dylan Raiola, but he was a guy that we thought could enter the mix to be one of the top underclassmen draft eligible guys behind Arch, behind Nico, behind Dylan Raiola. So now enters the portal. He's going to be in hot demand in the transfer portal. It'll be interesting to kind of see where he ends up. Miller Moss out of USC. I feel like early in the year, that first game against LSU, the bar really rose really fast. This is a guy that maybe he could be a round 1 or round 2 pick this year. That kind of momentum kind of started to, go the other way as he went towards the middle part of the season. But I think he can get it right back. If he goes to a place like Michigan and takes that Michigan team and all of a sudden they're back to being a good offense and a better team overall, I think Miller Moss can find himself improving his draft stock. I like the physical traits, the quarterbacking skill that he possesses. He's pretty raw, pretty inexperienced, not a lot of game time. I think he needs that. And if he ends up in the right situation, I think you could see him improve his draft stock next year to be a day 2 caliber prospect. Connor Wegman, we started the year saying, this guy has all the raw traits, right? Beginning of the year, it was Donovan Smith from Houston. It was Connor Wegman from Texas A&M. Could those guys elevate to round 1 caliber prospects? That was the legitimate conversation before the year started. Donovan Smith, and in particular, Connor Wegman. It wasn't just me who liked Donovan Smith and Connor Wegman. Pro Football Focus was in on them. Dane Brugler liked Connor Wegman a lot. A lot of people were in on Connor Wegman. Be interesting to kind of see. He's got a lot of physical traits. Hasn't played a lot. Needs to end up somewhere where he's the clear-cut starter, gets a fresh start, and can he show off those high-end traits that had people so intrigued as recently as August that thought he can materialize into a top QB prospect in this upcoming class. Obviously, that didn't materialize, but a lot of traits there with Connor Wegman to potentially get there down the line. And then a whole bunch of wide receivers. We had talked about Kevin Concepcion out of NC State last time. I think he's one of the top non-draft eligible underclassmen wide receiver prospects in the country. But 3 more new names to add to the mix. Nick Anderson out of Oklahoma. He was the guy I was really intrigued with as a draft eligible prospect, young draft eligible prospect, but he was draft eligible this year. Really liked the stuff in the summer. Interested to see kind of where he lands. I think he could be a guy that is really intriguing. Next year, we're talking about the top transfers to keep an eye on. I think Nick Anderson could be in that mix. And then 2 real underclassmen, Micah Hudson, Eric Singleton, both those guys, big-time prospects coming out of high school, didn't have the years that I think many expected them. But in terms of the raw traits, the physical traits, those guys are going to be in high demand. They can step right into maybe replace a Ted McMillan or a Luther Burden or pick a team that is in dire need of a big-time wide receiver. These guys can step into a really unique situation and just all of a sudden start producing high-end stats. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. So I like targeting some of these guys who enter the transfer portal, coming off bad years, some of them. Sometimes you can take advantage of that in your Devy leagues and maybe make an aggressive move for one of these guys if you believe in the high-end talent. And these are a couple of guys that I would be believing in this offseason and try to get them now when there's some uncertainty following them as they're in the transfer portal. Let's take this over to the Sunday aspect of things and talk about what we saw in week 14 of the NFL season. Let's start with the NFL Rookie Report before we spin over to the Fantasy Dynasty Report. I think we've talked so much about Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Bo Nix. Let's take a break from that this week, especially since only Caleb was a guy that, Chicago really struggled this week. He put up some stats late, but we've talked a lot about them. I want to bring up J.J. McCarthy because I feel like the rhetoric on Twitter over the last couple of days, a lot of people just assuming Minnesota just kind of let Sam Darnold walk out the door. And I don't know. They're sitting there at 11-2. I understand that they really like J.J. McCarthy. But how far does Sam Darnold got to get? What if they make the conference championship? What if they make the Super Bowl? Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they make a run. Even if it's the semifinal, the second round of the playoffs. If Darnold plays well, are we sure they're just going to let him walk out? Like, what is that saying? I understand teammates might love JJ McCarthy, but they also realize if you just let Sam Darnold walk out the door and things don't go swimmingly well pretty quickly with JJ McCarthy, or if there's any, issues in his injury coming that materialize, there's going to be a lot of people that are very frustrated there. So I think the scenario that could play itself out is one of two things. I do think the franchise tag is possible. Now, I don't know enough about the Vikings salary cap situation, but I do know you could always manipulate the salary cap if need be. So that's the first thing. Do they consider the franchise tag and kind of say, okay, like, let's see if this is who Sam Darnold is now, are we sure we just want to let him go out the door for free? Let's see where JJ McCarthy is coming back from the injury. He was still a rookie, that there was still some talk. I know he had some good preseason moments, but there were some people before the year started that thought Sam Darnold might be the quarterback for the first 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks of the season before they handed the reins over to JJ McCarthy. Now, are we going to assume that JJ McCarthy is just 100% ready to go, obviously from the injury first, and then they just give him the job? They weren't willing to do that this year. Most likely, which is why they brought in Darnold, and it looked like he was going to be the starter for a while. So that's one scenario. Second scenario is I could see them franchise tagging him and then trading him. But again, that still opens up. But at least if they trade him, I think the argument of just letting him walk out the door would rub people inside, teammates less if they were like, okay, we got a 2 and a 4 for him, or some team was willing to give us a 1 for him to get him on their team. I do think that would rub players the wrong less than just letting him walk out. If he goes 13 and 4 or 14 and 3, wins a playoff game, pushes Detroit or Philadelphia in the second round of the playoffs, I think it's hard to walk away from a guy. I understand, great coach, great scheme, great offensive playmakers. But I mean, let's not sit here and act like Darnold isn't playing really well also. And I think if it wasn't that he had failed miserably prior, I think people would be looking at this very differently if he was like an unknown, like a Brock Purdy who kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think people would be so willing to just be like, oh yeah, he's gone. Because we saw Brock Purdy push Trey Lance basically off the 49ers. And I'm not saying this is the same scenario, but I think because we have seen Sam Darnold for longer, people are more quick to just be like, it's the scheme, it's the coach, it's the playmakers, it's not him. What if the Jets ruined him and he needed to get away from that and he needed to bounce around a little bit and eventually get with the right team and the right coach, and all of a sudden now he could live up to the pedigree that had him as a top 3 pick in his draft class, where some people thought he was worthy of going the first overall pick. Look what Baker Mayfield's doing now after bouncing around a little bit. Sam Darnold has been better than Baker Mayfield this year. They've both been very, very good. So I think this rhetoric about just moving him out, I don't know. It doesn't pass the smell test for me in terms of that. So I think the JJ McCarthy situation is really intriguing in terms of evaluating rookies, because I almost feel more confident that Michael Penix will be starting next year for Atlanta than I do that JJ McCarthy will be starting for the Vikings. Because I think Kirk Cousins will be moved, because I don't see any reason why to hold off Michael Penix any longer. Steve, you can get a round 2 pick for Cousins. I'm sure someone will. If not round 2, someone will definitely give like a 3 and a 5 or something like that and give the reins over to Michael Penix. The McCarthy situation is different. Coming off an injury and Sam Darnold playing the way he was, this isn't a guy who doesn't have talent. He obviously has talent. So a lot of dominoes in movement there. But I think the McCarthy discussion is interesting. At the running back position, brutal. Jonathan Brooks, I don't know the severity of it yet unless I missed the report, but it sure seems like he might have done something to that ACL again, which just decimates. I feel awful for the player. He came back. He fought his way back to suffer another injury that fast. You wonder about long-term the viability of that knee in terms of putting the strain of an NFL running back, the cuts, the movements, all that stuff, where he didn't even fully get back from this one yet. And with a lot of question marks now. This running back class, we talked about it, right? Between now Jonathan Brooks' injury, we were already down in terms of drafts, in terms of fantasy stock in Jonathan Brooks because of the Chuba Hubbard extension. Now, this basically takes Jonathan Brooks basically almost off the table for a big chunk of next year, probably, and who knows. So his dynasty stock is at a very, very low. He's just, if you have him, you probably just stash him if you have a taxi squad or an injury spot, and you just stash him there. Because I don't see anybody giving up much for Jonathan Brooks right now. We already talked about Trey Benson. At this point, this running back class is really, you got Bucky Irving, you got Tyrone Tracy, and then a whole lot of unknown all over the place in terms of that. The wide receiver position, Brian Thomas, another solid performance, 8 catches, 86 yards, not a lot to say there. And then tight end position, Brock Bowers continues to do Brock Bowers things. Far and away the best tight end prospect in terms of fantasy moving forward. At this point, I don't even know if anybody's really close to him. I think the bigger question is in the startup draft, how high does he go? In a redraft next year, how high does he go? I think those are the questions that come into the mix. And let's round out tonight with a fantasy dynasty report. Some guys who I think stock up, stock down, stock neutral, buy low, sell high. Let's start at the quarterback position because I do feel like there's a whole lot of stock ups right now. Josh Allen continued to show why he's the clear QB1, I think, in dynasty right now. Clear QB1 for redraft. 6 touchdowns this past week. I know they came up short, but what he's able to do with his arm and his legs, and how much of the focal point of that offense he is, to me, makes him the clear QB1 in all of dynasty. That's not changing going into the offseason or into next year. We already talked about Sam Darnold. I would say stock up, but there's a little bit of uncertainty there because he's performing so well in Minnesota. That offense, that scheme, those playmakers, we don't know where he's going to be next year. But I still think that if he gets with the right team and the right program, we may see this may be the new version of Sam Darnold we see. So I think stock up on him. I talked about Baker, stock up on him. Great to see these guys turning around their careers. Bryce Young, a little bit of life over Bryce Young over the last couple of weeks. I think that's a great sign. Maybe he's never going to live up to being the first pick overall. Carolina gave up so many assets to move up and trade for him. But it is nice to see that, not that long ago, we were like, is he even going to be a starter next year? Is Carolina going to be drafting a quarterback? Maybe the stretch of this year kind of buys him another year, maybe settles in a little bit, and we see him at least become a functional, good starting NFL quarterback. Tua continues to play real well, but I do think it's one of those interesting scenarios where if he closes out the year really well, do you try to use that as an opportunity to sell in the offseason due to the uncertainty of what would happen if he gets another concussion? What happens when Tyreek Hill, isn't as explosive? I know Tyreek Hill hasn't had a great year, but just his presence alone changes so much in that. Could see a scenario in a super flex league where maybe if Tua finishes the year out strong, you kind of sell him and get out now while you can and still get back decent value. Joe Burrow continues to just perform at a really high level that when I reevaluate my quarterback rankings, I do think that in terms of the guys who don't add the rushing component, I do think you got to start moving Joe Burrow into the conversation ahead of those non-running quarterbacks that also can produce with the passing. But, I think the conversation is Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow. I think it's a real conversation for fantasy. I don't think, what we've seen from Joe Burrow. Now, I know he's probably going to lose T. Higgins, but high-end production from Joe Burrow, I would say stock up on him. At the running back position, we talked about Jonathan Brooks, so it's impossible not to say stock up on Chuba Hubbard. We'll go into the offseason. We'll go into next season to clear RB1 work, carrying a heavy workload back for the Panthers next year. Chase Brown continues. Now I think what I like to see about Chase Brown is he's starting to show versatility, being more of a weapon in the passing game. He wasn't utilized much in college in the passing game. We're seeing a lot more in the passing game from Chase Brown. I'm sure Cincinnati's going to add someone. We talked about how great of a running back class it is, but I could see Cincinnati adding somebody in like round 4. I think Chase Brown's going to have an opportunity to be the guy going into his 3rd season next year. So I think stock really up on Chase Brown. People still might not realize how good of a dynasty asset he is. I know there's some concern because he's a day 3 guy, strong running back class. Could they see a scenario where they take a guy in round 2 and then that really impacts his value? Maybe, but I'd be buying Chase Brown. At the wide receiver position, Puka Nacua, I think the conversation now surrounding Puka Nacua after a 12-catch, 162-yard game is how high is too high. We know we have the guys like Jamar Chase, who I think after his performance this week is a legitimate conversation if should it be him or should it be Justin Jefferson. I think it's really a coin flip now. I think those should be the 1-2. I think CD Lamb should then come in at number 3. And then I think you start talking about other guys, Malik Neighbors and what his upside might be. Puka Nacua, as much as I love Malik Neighbors and he's my guy, he's the Giants. Puka Nacua's rookie year was obviously far superior than Malik Neighbors. Probably a lot to do with the scheme and the offense and the quarterback, but it was what we're seeing Puka Nacua doing right now since he got back from injury. Elite level production, only in his second year. So I think the conversation now becomes, is he over? Should he be ahead of Malik Neighbors? Should he be ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown? I don't think a lot of people had them there. I think you're starting to make the case that he probably is a top 5, top 6 overall dynasty wide receiver. Stock up on Jordan Addison. We're seeing him play really well. Let's not lose sight. I know they have Justin Jefferson, but let's not lose sight that Jordan Addison was a round 1 pick. He was a round 1 pick. He's in a great offense. He's in a great scheme. Attention will always be towards Justin Jefferson. So I am very intrigued with Jordan Addison. I would say stock up on Jordan Addison going into the offseason. If he has, I think right now you're going to see some inconsistencies for sure. And even next year you would. But I think he could be a really strong wide receiver for in Dynasty. Might not be valued by as a clear top 30, 36 guy by everybody because of, Jefferson being there and Hawkinson being there. But I think I wouldn't mind being aggressive to go get Jordan Addison. Jerry Jeudy playing the best ball of his career. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be of the Browns next year, but hopefully this, emergence late in the season kind of carries over to next year. And this is the Jerry Jeudy that I loved coming out of college. I really was in on Jerry Jeudy, that draft class. It never materialized in Denver, but it's starting to show why he was around 1. Very high caliber prospect coming out. Hopefully, so I would say stock up on Jerry Jeudy. There might still be people that are a little lukewarm. We've never seen this level of production. Is it because Jameis Winston's willing to throw the ball over the field? I think those are legitimate questions. I think I'd use it to my advantage and try to buy stock in Jerry Jeudy now. Great to see Jalen Waddle kind of looking like the old self a little bit. As Tyreek Hill gets a little bit older, he's not the same player this year anyway. He wasn't the same player he was in the past. If Jalen Waddle could reemerge to being the high caliber prospect, his stock came really down this year at times because they just were not using him a lot. If someone still, views him as a guy didn't live up to the hype this year, maybe he can be had much lower now than he would have been prior to this season. And then Khalil Shakir, what we're seeing with Khalil Shakir and the rapport he has with Josh Allen, I think is very intriguing. I think that puts Shakir on that radar as a wide receiver 3-4 type. I'm liking Shakir and the relationship he has with Josh Allen. I think that's going to kind of, be a guy that he looks at and trusts every year in. I don't think he's going to have this high ceiling. And I think, whether, I know they traded for Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman was a rookie. Other people could emerge there, but I think Shakir is going to have a viable role in that offense. Josh Allen has always utilized his slot receiver very heavily. Shakir can get open. He's got inside-outside versatility, even though I think he's best in the slot. So I think stock up on Khalil Shakir. So those are a couple guys that I thought kind of wanted to bring up. Most of those names I haven't really talked about too much this year. So some guys that I'd be intrigued with buying in the offseason as things currently stand. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out our premium content tab for $9.99. You get access to all of our premium notebooks. You immediately get the scouting notebook. There will be so many updates to that. Most of the reports in there are from before the season started with a couple of tinkers here and there. There will be massive changes to that over the coming weeks. You get the rankings notebook. It has all our different rankings, draft eligible rankings, dynasty rookie rankings. It'll have our tiered rankings closer to the draft. It'll have the next wave of dynasty rookie rankings. It has our Devy rankings, a lot of rankings to digest there. And then in April, you get the draft projections notebook as well. Tabs for every position, offense and defense, over 400 prospects in this draft projections notebook. Snapshot of how they win, strengths, some developmental areas, their combine measurements, their combine testing numbers, and then we we put them in the order and based on what we think how we think they're going to come off the board, not from our evaluation, because there's plenty of our discussion about that, but based on everything we're hearing. I use every resource at my disposal. Listen to who. I have my people that I really, rely on in terms of reading their material, listening to their stuff. And I kind of morph it all together into this projection of how I expect it to come off the board. We've had tremendous success projecting the 32 players to be taken in round one, the 100 or so players to be taken in the first 3 rounds, and then our best guess at projecting every pick in the NFL draft. We've hit numbers like 225 out of 255, 232 out of 255, numbers like that, which really speaks to, we're trying to, not miss out on guys who we think could be round 7 picks, round 6 picks. We know the guys who are going to make up, for the most part, the top 100, but we take a lot of pride in trying to help prepare you for day 3 using that draft projections notebook, trying to figure out who's going to be the guys going in round 6, round 7 of the NFL draft and to your favorite team in the NFL and maybe your dynasty league for those offensive skill players as well. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.